The early 2000s, back when phones still flipped open and the internet hummed through dial-up tones that filled your living room like static whispers. That's when everything began to crack. My name's Daniel Reeves, and back then, I was 32, living in a quiet suburb outside Chicago with my wife, Melissa, and our 2 kids, Noah and Ella. We had the kind of life that looks good on paper. A small brick house with a red door, a yard full of toys, and a dog that never stopped barking. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Melissa worked part-time at a design boutique downtown, and I managed operations for a small logistics firm. The routine was simple, predictable, safe. At least, I thought it was. The first cracks didn't come with shouting or cold shoulders. They came quietly, in the form of stories that didn't line up. Our kids, Noah and Ella, started talking about their days more. They were 4 and 6 then, old enough to babble about everything. They'd come home saying things like, "Grandma made us pancakes again," or "We watched movies at Grandpa's house." At first, I smiled. Melissa's parents lived out near Rockford, about an hour and a half away, so I figured she must have been taking the kids for visits while I was working. Family time. Harmless enough. But then it started happening almost every week. Sometimes twice. Even on days she said she was working. That's when I started doing the math. Her job was only part-time, 2, maybe 3 days a week. And those days, she claimed she was busy at the shop or running errands. But according to our kids, Grandma and Grandpa saw them nearly every other day. Something didn't fit. So one night, I asked casually over dinner, "Hey, how are your parents doing? The kids say you've been seeing them a lot lately." Melissa didn't look up from her plate. "Oh yeah," she said too quickly. "They've been helping out while I'm at work. You know how Mom is with the kids. She loves it." I nodded, but her eyes didn't meet mine. And if you've ever lived with someone long enough, you know, that's where the truth hides. In the small hesitations. The glances that don't happen. The tone that feels practiced. Melissa had always been a terrible liar. So, I started paying closer attention. One morning, after she left to run errands, I walked out to the driveway and checked the odometer on her car. She drove a silver Honda Accord, reliable, unassuming, nothing fancy. I wrote down the mileage in a small notebook I kept for work. A week later, I checked again. She'd added over 400 miles. 400 miles in a single week. That's not commuting. That's not grocery shopping. That's something else. That's when the quiet dread started to set in. You know that feeling. The one that hits your gut before your brain can make sense of it. It's not panic yet. It's just the wrongness of things. Like hearing your favorite song, but one note is off. I told myself I was overthinking. That maybe she really was helping her parents with something. That maybe I was turning into my father, suspicious, controlling, bitter. But deep down I knew. It's strange how love and suspicion can coexist, like oil and water that never really mix. I still kissed her goodnight, still helped her with the dishes, still tucked the kids in beside her. But every word, every movement, felt like it was happening under fluorescent light. Harsh, unforgiving, artificial. And then came the note. One ordinary Tuesday, I came home from work early. Melissa had taken the kids to her parents' house again, or so she said. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the desktop computer in our living room. That old Dell that took forever to start up. I sat down to check my email, and that's when I noticed it. A small yellow sticky note beside the keyboard. It said, AOL, Mel_Designs, password, Lily88. She'd left it there, in her handwriting. Careless. Confident. I stared at it for a full minute. My hands were shaking before I even touched the mouse. I told myself I wouldn't do it. That I'd respect her privacy. Maybe it was nothing. But curiosity and pain don't care about the moral high ground. So I logged in. Her inbox was a map of a life I didn't know she was living. Most of it was ordinary. Emails with her boss, newsletters, pictures from her sister. But then there was a thread that caught my eye. Subject, lunch. It was from a name I didn't recognize, and the email had been forwarded to her best friend from college, Rachel. The message was simple. Same place as last week. Can't wait to see you. Her reply to Rachel was what broke me. He still makes me laugh the way he used to. His wife has really let herself go. I know it's wrong, but it feels so good to feel wanted again. I read those lines over and over, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She wasn't talking about me. I scrolled up. The thread stretched back months, vague mentions, inside jokes, coded names. She called him B. Sometimes Ben, sometimes just B. It didn't matter. I knew what it meant. When you love someone, you know their words. And these weren't words meant for me. I printed the emails. Every single one of them. I hid them in a folder inside the garage, behind the old photo albums we never looked through anymore. For the next few days, I went through the motions. Breakfast, work, dinner, sleep, repeat. But my mind was running laps around itself, trying to piece together how long it had been happening, who he was, and where they met. I couldn't confront her yet, not without proof. Not after seeing my parents destroy each other with accusations that went nowhere. I needed to be sure. That's when I called my friend Tom, a police officer I'd known since high school. He listened quietly as I told him everything. When I finished, he sighed. Dan, you don't need to get yourself in trouble here, he said. But I know a guy. Used to be a detective. Left the force, does private work now. He's discreet. That's how I met Ron Barrett, private investigator. He was in his mid-40s, gray at the temples, calm eyes. The kind of guy who could sit in a car for 12 hours and never get bored. When we met, I handed him a manila folder with the printed emails and a page of notes about Melissa's schedule. I need to know everything, I said quietly. Every place she goes. Every person she meets. I want names, times, dates, everything. Ron nodded slowly. I can do that. You sure you want to see it? I didn't answer. Because deep down, I already knew the truth. I just needed to see it with my own eyes. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. She slept soundly, one arm draped over me, the same way she had for years. And I remember thinking, how many times had she done that after being with him? The human heart is cruelly efficient at surviving its own destruction. Over the next week, Ron kept me updated, short calls, coded messages, nothing that could tip her off. And then, after 2 weeks, he asked to meet in person. We met in a diner just off I-90, quiet, out of the way. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos. Melissa's car was parked outside a rundown motel. Melissa and a man I'd never seen before, holding hands in the parking lot of a restaurant. Melissa smiling in ways I hadn't seen in years, not with me, at least. Each photo had timestamps, addresses, and notes. She'd take the kids to her parents' house in Rockford, then meet this man for lunch, then go to that motel for a few hours. Then she'd drive back, pick up our kids, and come home to me. The perfect loop. The perfect lie. I closed the folder, my fingers trembling. How long? I asked. Ron took a sip of his coffee. About 6 months. Maybe longer. I stared at the table, the patterns in the Formica blurring. It was one thing to suspect, another to know. I thanked him, paid the bill, and walked out into the cold. The world looked the same. Cars, trees, sky. But something inside me had shifted permanently. That's when I decided. This wasn't going to end like my parents. No shouting matches. No broken furniture. No crying in front of the kids. I was going to do this my way. Quiet. Careful. Final. The drive home after meeting Ron felt longer than usual. The interstate stretched endlessly in front of me, but I wasn't really seeing it. The whole world had taken on that dull, muted tone that comes after bad news. Like I was living underwater, every sound muffled, every color washed out. Melissa was home when I got there. She greeted me with a kiss, smiling like nothing had changed. And that was the moment I realized just how much she'd perfected the art of pretending. That smile, the one I used to live for, now felt like a mask. I nodded, played along, asked about the kids, and went through the motions. But inside, I was hollow. That night, when the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the garage with the photos spread out in front of me. The man she was seeing, the one Ron identified, was named Ryan Foster. Ryan was a VP of sales for a family-owned manufacturing company in town. Married, 3 kids, wife named Claire. The picture of suburban stability. I stared at his photo for a long time. He didn't look like much, just an ordinary guy in a cheap suit with thinning hair and a smug grin. But that's the thing about betrayal. It's never about looks. It's about how someone makes you feel. And he had made my wife feel something I apparently hadn't in a long time. I thought about confronting her that night, about throwing the photos on the table and demanding an explanation. But every scenario I imagined ended the same way. Tears, lies, blame, excuses. I wasn't going to give her that chance. I'd seen my parents destroy each other when I was a kid. I'd watched my father shout until his voice cracked, watched my mother break down in the kitchen, watched love turn into venom. I wasn't going to repeat that cycle. I wanted something clean, something permanent, something she would feel. So, I called my lawyer the next morning. Her name was Lydia Carson, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who'd handled enough divorces to recognize the look in my eyes before I even spoke. She didn't ask for the story, she didn't have to. I slid Ron's report across the desk. She flipped through the pages, stopping occasionally to scan a photo or a timestamp. When she finished, she folded her hands. "You understand," she said carefully, "that in Illinois, infidelity doesn't change the division of assets much." I nodded. "I'm not doing this for money," I said quietly. "I'm doing it for peace." Lydia's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. "Then let's do this right." Over the next week, we prepared everything: paperwork, filings, and financial records. I documented everything I could. Every lie she'd told. Every inconsistency. Every piece of proof. Ron stayed in contact, too. I asked him to dig deeper, not just into Melissa, but into Ryan. And once again, he delivered. Ryan's wife, Claire, had no idea what was going on. From what Ron found, she was a stay-at-home mom, devoted to their 3 kids, deeply involved with her church, and completely oblivious to her husband's afternoon business meetings. Ron showed me photos of Ryan and Melissa entering the motel, laughing, kissing, walking hand in hand like teenagers. I stared at those pictures until my eyes burned. There's something indescribably cruel about seeing the person you built your life with share joy with someone else. It's like watching a movie where the main character dies, except you're the one dying, and the movie never ends. But something inside me had shifted. The heartbreak was still there, yes, but underneath it was something else. A calm, a focus, a plan. I wasn't going to confront them in anger. I wasn't going to yell or beg or demand explanations. I was going to expose them, cleanly, quietly, precisely. Ron was hesitant when I told him what I wanted to do next. "Are you sure about this, Dan?" he asked, his voice low over the phone. "It's going to burn everything down." I looked out the window at the life I'd built, the swing set in the backyard, the half-finished treehouse, the photos on the wall. "It already is," I said. "I'm just making sure they feel the heat too." Here's what I planned. On the same day, Melissa would be served with divorce papers at her workplace. Ron would visit Ryan's wife, Claire, and show her everything. The photos, the emails, the timeline. All of it. They would both be exposed at the same moment. A perfectly synchronized unraveling. The day before it happened, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my mind. The laughter that wasn't mine, the lies I'd accepted, the life I thought I had. In the morning, I got the kids ready for school. Melissa kissed me goodbye, humming softly like she always did. I watched her drive away, knowing that by the time she got home, everything she'd been hiding would be ashes. Lydia's process server met her at her boutique job around noon. From what I later heard, she was helping a customer when he walked in, asked her to confirm her name, and handed her the envelope. She froze. Right there, in front of everyone. Her co-workers watched as she tore it open, eyes darting across the page. Then she dropped it, her hands shaking. At the same time, Ron was knocking on a front door across town. Claire answered, still wearing her house slippers, confusion in her eyes. Ron introduced himself, handed her the folder, and said softly, "You deserve to know the truth." He told me later that she didn't speak for a full minute. She just stood there, staring at the photos, her face draining of color. Then she thanked him and closed the door. I can't imagine what that moment felt like for her. But I knew she deserved it, just as much as I did. By that evening, the dominoes had started to fall. Melissa called me 8 times that day. I didn't answer once. Her voicemails ranged from confusion to panic to tears. When I finally got home, she was waiting in the kitchen, red-eyed, clutching the divorce papers. "Daniel, please," she said the moment I walked in. "This isn't what you think. I made a mistake." I dropped my keys on the counter and met her eyes. 6 months, I said quietly. Lunches, motels, lies. Don't tell me it's a mistake. It's a choice. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I walked past her, into the living room, and sat down. The kids were still at her parents' place for the night. Thank God. For a few minutes, she just stood there, crying softly. Then she whispered, "How did you find out?" I looked up at her and said, "You left your password on a sticky note. That's how much you respected me." Her face crumpled. She sank into a chair, covering her mouth. I wanted to feel satisfaction in that moment, but what I felt instead was emptiness. Betrayal doesn't end with confrontation. It ends with silence. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, she packed a bag and went to her parents. The next few weeks were a blur: lawyers, paperwork, custody arrangements. I tried to keep it civil for the kids' sake, and to her credit, so did she. But whatever we'd once had was gone. Meanwhile, word had spread about Ryan and Claire. Ron had been right. It burned everything down. Claire filed for divorce within days. And since Ryan's position at his company came courtesy of Claire's father, that didn't last long either. He was fired before the week was over. Kicked out of the family home, which her parents owned, by the way. He went from VP of sales to living in a rented one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It got worse. There were reports of fights between him and Claire, shouting matches, police calls, even a restraining order. At one point, he showed up at the old house demanding to see the kids, and her brother broke his nose. By the time the dust settled, he'd lost everything: his job, his marriage, his reputation. And as for Melissa, she tried to rebuild, but something in her had dimmed. The sparkle she used to have was gone. She worked, took care of the kids, and we remained civil, but it was transactional, nothing more. Years later, when I looked back at those days, I realized something important. Revenge didn't give me joy. It gave me peace. And peace, after betrayal, is the sweetest thing you can have. When our kids grew up, graduated, started lives of their own, I stopped speaking to her altogether. Not out of hate, but because there was simply nothing left to say. I don't think about her much anymore. But sometimes, when I drive past that old diner where I met Ron, I remember the man I was that day: broken, angry, desperate for truth. And I realized that man finally got what he needed. Not revenge, not justice, but freedom. Time has a strange way of softening sharp edges. In the months after everything fell apart, life moved on. Slowly, awkwardly, unevenly, but it moved. Melissa and I signed the divorce papers in silence. No dramatic confrontation. No shouting. Just signatures on paper and a handshake that said, "We're done pretending." The first few weeks without her felt foreign. The house echoed differently. The kids asked quiet questions I struggled to answer. Why isn't Mom here tonight? When is she coming back? I told them the truth, the version they could handle. Mom and Dad both love you. We just don't love each other the same way anymore. They accepted it faster than I expected. Kids adapt. Adults pretend. For a while, I filled the silence with work, extra hours, extra projects, anything to keep from thinking. But when the nights came and the house was still, the memories crept in. Her laughter, her perfume lingered in the hallway. The way we used to dance in the kitchen on Friday nights when the kids were asleep. Love doesn't die in a single day. It fades, slowly, cruelly, until one morning, you wake up and realize it's gone. The kids spent weekends with Melissa at her parents' place, and during those weekends, I learned how to live alone again. Cooking for one, watching movies without commentary, falling asleep on the couch because the bed felt too big. But as the weeks turned into months, something changed. The sadness didn't disappear, it evolved. It became clear. I started running again, not to chase anything, but to outrun the heaviness. Each morning before sunrise, I'd lace up my shoes and jog through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, breathing in the cold air until my lungs burned. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. Melissa called occasionally, always about the kids. Her tone was polite, careful, the voice of someone walking on eggshells. We didn't talk about what happened. We never would. One afternoon, maybe 6 months after the divorce, she stopped by to drop off Noah's school project. She looked different, thinner, paler, older somehow. Life has a way of etching truth into faces. We stood in the doorway, awkward silence stretching between us. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I'm sorry. For everything." I looked at her for a long moment. "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't change what we broke." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I know." And that was the last real conversation we ever had. The years rolled on. The kids grew up. Noah went into engineering, and Ella became a nurse. They still visited their mother, still loved her, and I never stood in the way of that. She was their mom. Her mistakes didn't have to be theirs. As for me, I moved downtown. Smaller apartment, simpler life. I started taking photography classes at night, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. The camera became my therapy. Through the lens, I learned to notice small things again. The way light hit wet pavement, the laughter of strangers in a cafe, the curve of a skyline at dusk. Life, in all its messy beauty, kept going. Now and then, I'd hear whispers about Melissa. She dated a few people. Nothing serious. Eventually, she met someone new, a man she worked with. They lasted a year before they fell apart. I wasn't happy or sad to hear it. I just felt detached. When someone breaks your trust at that level, it changes the way you feel about love. Not in a bitter way, just a quieter one. And then there was Ryan Foster, the man who started it all. Rumors about him surfaced every so often, usually from mutual acquaintances or old coworkers. After his divorce, he tried to start a new business. It failed within a year. He bounced between jobs, each one lower than the last. Word was, he started drinking heavily. One story stuck with me. Apparently, one night, he showed up at his ex-wife Claire's new house, uninvited, begging her to take him back. Her brother called the police, and Ryan spent the night in jail. After that, he vanished. No social media, no phone listings, nothing, just gone. I guess some people can't rebuild when the mirror shows them what they've become. Claire, on the other hand, thrived. After divorcing Ryan, she went to work for her father's company, the same one Ryan had been fired from, and over the years, she climbed her way up to running it. I heard she was strong, respected, even kind. The kind of person who takes her pain and turns it into fuel. We never spoke, but sometimes I wondered how she felt about what happened. Maybe she understood, like I did, that revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about reclaiming yourself. 15 years passed before I saw Melissa again. It was at Ella's wedding, a sunny afternoon in late spring, the kind of day that feels like a second chance. Melissa arrived with her parents, smiling, dressed elegantly but simply. For a moment, seeing her there, laughing with our grown children, I almost forgot everything that had happened. Almost. During the reception, she approached me, holding a glass of wine. We hadn't spoken in years. "You look good, Daniel," she said softly. "So do you," I replied. She smiled, but there was sadness in it, the kind that comes from knowing too late what you threw away. "I'm glad we can be here like this," she said. "For them." "Me too." We stood there for a moment, watching Ella dance with her husband. Then she whispered, "Do you ever think about us?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I once loved, not the one who betrayed me. "I used to," I said. "But then I realized the best thing we ever did was let each other go." She nodded slowly, tears glimmering. "You were always better at moving on than I was." I didn't answer. She turned and walked away, blending back into the crowd. And just like that, she became part of the past again. That night, as the music faded and the guests left, I stood outside beneath the string lights, watching the newlyweds drive off into the night. I thought about how life had twisted and turned, how a single act of betrayal had once shattered everything I knew, but in its ruins, I found peace. I didn't need to destroy Melissa or Ryan. Life had done that on its own. All I had to do was let the truth breathe, and truth, when exposed, is a quiet executioner. Sometimes, justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like moving forward when others can't. Years later, when people asked me if I ever regretted how it all went down, I'd tell them this. I don't regret exposing the truth. I regret not seeing it sooner. And in the end, that truth set me free. I built a new life, one defined not by betrayal, but by peace. A life where I could look in the mirror and not see anger, not see pain, but just a man who survived and learned to live again. And maybe that's the real sweetest revenge of all. Not watching them fall, but standing tall long after they've faded.